Shalom from various places. This is Parsha Talk. I am Rabbi Eliot Malomet in Highland Park, New Jersey. Joining me, Rabbi Barry Chesler from Long Island. And in Woodstock, New York, still, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky, also of Anshe Chesed in Manhattan. Hello, friends.
Hello, Eliot.
We are studying Parshat Pinhas today. Parshat Pinhas, different from the other Parshiot. There's no war here. There's no earth opening up. There's no complaining. But there's a lot of stuff going on here, starting with Pinhas. We recall at the end of last week's Parsha, Pinhas, he did an act of zeal. Jeremy, what did he do?
Zeal good or zeal bad? Well, it's kind of hard to say here in this parsha. So zeal gmor, let's go learn and figure it out. Pinhas, at the end of the parsha, the Midianite people had sought to entrap, the end of previous parsha, had sought to entrap the Israelites in an idolatrous and sexual kind of orgiastic moment. And at least one of the Israelite leaders, Zimri ben Salu, succumbed and was with a Midianite princess named Cosbi Batsur.
Don't say, no, it can't be.
It's the Torah says it, okay? and
that's how he knows it can't be.
The stuff that you're liable to read in the Bible actually might be so. So they are in flagrante delicto, flouting the norms of the people, and Pinhas, in a rage, takes the spear, and given the posture of Zimri and Cosbi, was able to get both of them with a single spear blow through their midsections. And that is seen, that act of violent zealotry, that act of murder or violent zealotry, or depending on how you want to describe it, is seen as restraining the anger of God. And this is the beginning of our parsha now, that God says, Pinhas ben Elazar ben Aaron Kohen restrained my anger, and I didn't destroy the people in my anger. And that is a line that we repeat to this day at a Brit Milah, at the beginning of a Brit Milah.
Barry, your take on Pinhas in that sense. Is he...
Difficult figure to evaluate, I think. I think most of us don't like zealous types, unless it happens to include us at the moment. And zeal has to be controlled in some way. But while Jeremy was describing the story, I was thinking that God's holiness has to be preserved, that human beings can violate that in free will. If Pinhas would not have acted, then perhaps God's response would have been worse than Pinhas's. I'm always struck by what appears to be this reward that's given to Pinhas, the Brit Shalom. As we were discussing earlier, I thought Jeremy had a beautiful insight that the Brit Shalom is going to become the program for Pinhas. It's not so much a reward, but that his field of action now is going to be only in terms of peace. Yeah. He's not going to be killing any more people. He's only going to be killing animals in the service of God.
There's a small orthographical feature in the Torah that is very vivid. The vav in the middle of Briti Shalom, the vav in the middle of the word Shalom, by tradition, when we have the Sefer Torah, there's a small, it's like a cut in the middle of that vav. It's kind of sliced in half. And it connotes that spear of Pinhas, maybe a broken spear, and it connotes the damaged character of peace. The temple is supposed to be about peace. It's supposed to be about making peace between earth and heaven. The temple, for example, is supposed to be a place where there's no hammer sound and there's no metal, which is an instrument of violence used to create the altar. And Pinhas is not that guy. He's a guy who, and there's plenty more to say about rabbinic tradition's approach to Pinhas, but he certainly, for worse in obvious ways and perhaps better in some ways, is a person of violence who responds to a terrible situation with violence. And so to incorporate him into the Beit HaMikdash and the kehuna, the priesthood, is almost like, as Barry is saying, as we were saying, a kind of therapeutic program to soften the edge of the zealot.
So I have a couple of reactions. One is that I always like to refer back to Richard Elliot Friedman's commentary in these very difficult cases, because he draws a very, very strong distinction between violations of the ritual realm and violations of the ethical realm. And it's clear that this is a violation of the ritual realm in which there is no need for trial. The ritual realm is a realm of life and death. And here Pinhas, and I'm taking a point of defense, although the act of zeal is problematic, Pinhas takes matters into his own hands because he is seeing the violation right in front of him. It's the violation of several laws, and it's imperiling the survival of the community, and therefore he has to end it. And because he ends it, the plague that is happening there because of this act of idolatry ceases. However, there is the Bible's, the Torah's note of the act of zeal does mean that is problematic. And Briti Shalom, and true, yes, nicely put, the broken vav there is something very, very, conflicted about Pinhas. Pinhas is this individual who's entrusted with the service of God and is defiled by having shed human blood. And there's no way to reconcile that. There's no way to reconcile that. And perhaps the Brit Shalom is God's way of saying, I understand this irreconcilable conflict in your life. You'll have some modality of peace in your life because you're now confined in the precincts where you have to serve, and you are never going to be next to another person where you can execute that kind of judgment.
So I'm reminded of an exchange of letters between Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Buber in the 30s, where Gandhi was advocating that the Jews of Eastern Europe should practice civil disobedience, peaceful protest to the Holocaust. And Buber's response was that sometimes the tragedy of being human is that sometimes war must be fought, that sometimes the human condition is such that violence is the only answer. And perhaps the story of Pinhas is one of the biblical ways of fashioning that type of creed.
I think, first of all, that Buber letter is a tremendous letter, and I think expresses why Judaism, certainly the experience of Jews in the 20th and 21st century, I think you can't be a pacifist in the formal sense of the term, in the Gandhian sense, because exactly as Buber is right. Buber wrote right to him, I know the British are hard on you in India. The British are not the Nazis, okay? And that's obviously correct. So with Pinhas, of course, around religion and ritual violations, the kind of zealotry that says, I really object to what you're doing. You're violating our national code. We have to kill you. Has produced lots of wreckage through human history. What I think is great about the rabbinic tradition, and our listeners here all know that we are rabbinic Jews, but the Bible represents a certain different time and place, and rabbinic Judaism represents a religion that's all about study and discourse and ritual. And the rabbis, I think, in general, are a rational, moderate sort of folk. They want to discuss things. And though there's a Mishnah that says, Bo'el Aramit Kenaim Pogimbo, somebody who does what Zimri ben Salah was doing, then the what do you call it? Then the zealous should stand up and do what Pinhas did, or are empowered to do so. But the rabbinic tradition, that's a Mishnah. It is in rabbinic tradition, but in the main, rabbinic tradition asserts that you shouldn't tell people to do that, right? If somebody asks you, should I be a zealot? You should tell them no. And the Jerusalem Talmud goes on to say something like really amazing. Pinhas shelo b'ratzon chachamim. Pinhas acted despite what the sages directed him to do, which is an amazing comment by readers of the Bible text. Which, because if you read the Bible text, Pinhas is praised, if in a subtle way, and they say this is not our way. And I would say that over the history of the Jewish people, not perfectly, and there have been moments of violence and extrajudicial vigilantism, but in the main, I think our religion has done an admirable job of restraining those impulses and directing them into society where one person doesn't get to decide, for him or herself, this is what must be because I know, because God says. Instead, it's about our discourse and our shared meaning making, which I think is a much better sort.
Well, true, but it doesn't come out of a vacuum. The rabbis, I think, and we could go into the history here. The rabbis had their experience with zealotry. The rabbis had experience with uprising, with Bar Kokhba, and to catastrophic end. And so what you have here, what David Hartman calls sobriety, quoting Soloveitchik, there was the remarkable sobriety, which is we're going to take things just a little less, with a little less zeal. Zealotry as it needs to be contained. And we have one last point on this, which is, the tradition equates Pinhas with Eliyahu, both of whom are quintessential zealots. And where are they? They're in tradition. They're in confined spaces. Pinhas ends up in the temple, and Eliyahu ends up as a protector, where he can harm nobody, where he protects people. And Pinhas ends up in folklore, where he's always like the figure that accompanies Israel, the forlorn, abandoned, exiled people, the harbinger certainly of their redemption, but a kind of overseer and protector and doer of miracles. And that.
On this point, we do have some of those things in history, and note how the rabbis, in addition to the ways that you're saying, Eliyahu, let me take you to heaven so you don't kill 400 prophets of Baal anymore, please. Or the Maccabees loved Pinhas. They thought Pinhas was the man, because that's the story at the beginning of, in one of those book of Maccabees, I forget which one, that Matisyahu sees the guy eating pork and kills him. Yeah. And this is not the rabbi's way. And I think it's interesting to note, Eliot, you were saying this, say your point about the youth and the old age and relate to Moshe and his story.
So again, and again, we both made this parallel, the parallel between Moshe. Moshe commits an act of zealotry as a young man. He kills the Egyptian. Admittedly, it's a different kind of act, an act of manslaughter, resulting in Moses' exile. Moses, spends 40 years or a significant amount of time in exile until there are no longer anyone able to avenge the death of that Egyptian taskmaster. Returns to Egypt. Pinhas, he commits an act of, and there's an internal exile here. The exile is that he has to stay within the confines of the, V'shavti b'veit Adonai l'orech yamim. There's a double entendre to that. In Psalm 23, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Yeah, because you can't really be outside. You need your refuge. You need to be there. You can't deal with people. And where do we take the people that can't deal with people? Well, I don't want to say they go into the rabbinate, but what I want to say is,
they become congregants.
Some of them do.
What I want to say is, there's a reason why the priesthood is the priesthood, and the priesthood sequesters individuals in antiquity, and it's not lost on us. Let's move on. I want to, there's a lot in the parsha. The parsha deals with another census. It laced into the census are little footnotes about the Tan Vaviram and this and that, Ergo Onan, and Serach Bat Asher, this legendary figure, the only woman mentioned in the genealogy, Serach Bat Asher. She must have been about 300, 400 years old. But according to the Midrash, she literally knew where all the bones were buried. Yep. According to the Midrash, Moses asks where the bones of Joseph are buried, and they turn to Serach Bat Asher because she's like 300 years old. And she said, yes, the bones of Joseph are buried over there. They take it, etc.
I have another one with Serach Bat Asher. By the way, she, according to one Midrash, she is the one who informs Jacob that Joseph is still alive in Egypt. She sings him a song and says that he, because she's like this oracle who lives for 1,000 years and she knows everything and is a very illustrious mythic figure.
Okay, we have another important story in this parsha. There are two more that we need to talk about. The first one is Benot Tzlafchad. Batikravna Benot Tzlafchad ben Chefer ben Gilad ben Machir ben Moshe. Here, these daughters of Tzlafchad in the tribe of Menashe, their father Tzlafchad dies, leaving no male heirs. What then happens? Barry, you want to take it?
So they come to Moshe and wanting to know why they can't inherit their father's land, which is going to be apportioned to him when they cross over to the Jordan, in order that his name be maintained in the tribe. And Moshe, of course, doesn't have an answer. He consults God, and God says that the Benot Tzlafchad are indeed correct. That when there are no male heirs to a father, that his daughters will inherit.
Is this proto-feminism? Is this just the evolution of law? How would you frame this?
So I think that what strikes me about this is it has to do with the importance of the land and inheritance and how our names survive. And their concern is that if someone else takes the land, a relative of Tzlafchad, more distant than they, then Tzlafchad's name will disappear. And you know, the part of the parsha is going to deal with the apportionment, and where we are, literally, this place that we inhabit is an important construct for our lives, both personally and nationally.
Yeah.
And people do not want to be disenfranchised. They don't want to be uprooted. And if the Benot Tzlafchad cannot inherit Tzlafchad's land, then in effect, their father has been uprooted from the people.
Uprooted is a great word for this, because you know there's just no overstating how important a rootedness in the land is to Am Yisrael's sense, especially in these. You know, Bible is very concerned about exile and really concerned about homecoming. So for Tzlafchad, for the Tzlafchad family to risk having no rootedness in the land is just a fate worse than death. And so this, you know, sort of a genetic oddity, one in 256 to have 5 straight daughters, or 1 in 512, or whatever it is, like Tevye, that's just not fair. So they say, okay, we're going to see to it that the Tzlafchad clan does in fact have a place to call their own.
So looking at it in the legal lens, the Bible offers a mechanism for correction of an inherent flaw in the laws of property and inheritance. But I love what you said in terms of the land, and I think perhaps you could see Benot Tzlafchad as a key story in the transition of themes, because in the very next moment, God says to Moshe, "Ale al har ha'avarim hazeh ure'eh et ha'aretz." Go see the land. And you know, we are moving to the end of the book of Bamidbar. We are getting to the end of this journey. We are literally, as a people, standing at the edge of the land. And a great theme of the book of Dvarim is the land. So being preoccupied with matters that are concerning with the apportionment of the land is obviously a very, very important thing. It's a great moment where God takes Moshe and has him see the land, and of course that moment is echoed at the end of Dvarim. It's always quite an imaginative moment. But speaking of imaginative moments and really important moments, we have this moment of transition of leadership now. Moshe ordains Joshua. The text is, Moshe is concerned about succession. He says, let God, all of this, you know, the haruchot, God of the entire spiritual realm, let God appoint someone to lead this community. Let this community not be like sheep without a shepherd. Katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh. And so then what happens? God says, take your hand, put it on Joshua. What does Moshe do, Jeremy?
Vayismoch, it says, V'samachta et yadcha, singular, place your hand on him. But what Moshe actually does, Vayismoch et yadav, plural, two hands. And it's taken in the Midrash, and Rashi quotes this as a statement of Moses' immense generosity. We know that people can sometimes be jealous, and jealous of their successors, and jealous even of their students, and chas v'chalila, but some people are even jealous of their children. And Moshe is not like that, though. Moshe is very solicitous of his student Joshua, and if God perhaps wanted to just take the edge off of Moses' own, shall we say, mandatory retirement age of 120, and say, well, Joshua, you'll give Joshua one hand, and v'natata mehodecha alav, and we'll place a little of your glory on him. Moses gives him the full measure. He says, I want you to succeed, and I want you to be a great leader for these people. And to place the double hands is that great gesture of generosity.
So it's worth thinking about this image of the shepherd. So one of the great images that we have describing the relationship between God and Israel is God as a shepherd and we are the sheep. And the patriarchs, as we know, were all shepherds. And Moshe was a shepherd. That's how we first meet him. But Joshua is not a shepherd. And this is also part of the transition, that shepherd part of the people's history is coming to an end when they're going to go into the land and they're going to become farmers. But what they need to take them into the land is not a shepherd on earth, but a warrior. And as far as I know, Joshua is never described as a shepherd. He's an aide de camp. He's a military figure. And he represents the new generation, even though he was part of the Exodus. He's the new generation of Israelites that are going to be able to conquer the land.
It's a generational transition as much as it is a leadership transition. And when you think about political transitions, and just compare the Davidic household and the monarchy, and how much blood was spilled, the idea of the peaceful transition of power, which is something that I think is certainly in the tradition in Western democracies. Look, here you have the roots of that, or possibly an example of that, where Moshe, who could have undermined his successor to a terrible degree, really validates him. I think part of the placing of both hands is, look, the Midrash is, one hand is what God tells me, but I'm going to do it of my own. I'm going to put the second hand up and that moment, standing in front of the people, is the validation of the successor. The people love Moses. They have a difficulty with him as well, but they only know one leader. And the precarious situation of the successor is that to the predecessor can undermine the successor, and the successor can really be lost without the validation of the predecessor. It's a political moment here.
So they're looking for a new leader, but not a different leader, which is why it's so important that Moses invests so much of himself in Joshua. Obviously, there has to be a change from one generation to the next, from Moshe to Joshua, but the people do not want Joshua to be all that different from Moshe, where it can be possible for him to be like Moshe.
Do you think Moshe really understands this? This is something that I often think about.
Which Moshe? The Moshe in my imagination or in yours?
No, I don't know. Well, Moshe, is he someone who is aware that, because you have Midrashim at the end of his life where he just wants to hold on. He's like sticking his fingernails into, he's clawing back death. He doesn't want to give up easily.
He's profoundly human. I think Moshe, he makes it to the mountaintop, but doesn't make it to the promised land.
Right.
And so there are moments of great humanity where he is this giving figure where he does everything that we want a great leader to do, even at personal cost. And then there are moments when he acts, like the rest of us.
So great leaders are flawed then.
I would say that it seems to me that the Bible, I think, in its terseness and its major themes, tends to give us more about people's situations and roles and less about their personalities and experiences. I think the Midrash tends to fill those things in. I think that Moshe is right now in this passage portrayed as just doing a masterful job of managing this generational transition. The need for the leader from the desert is not the leader that is needed for the conquest of the land. I want to point out two things about it. One is that Moshe involves Elazar in the investiture of Joshua, which lets you know that just as Moshe and Aaron had complementary roles, we're setting that forward. There's a kind of a religious and a political social leaders, both of which going on. And the other thing I want to point out is that Moshe uses this phrase, which is common to Bamidbar, but rings in our ear from a couple of weeks ago, because Adonai Elohei Ruchot Lechol Basar, Lord of all the flesh of the spirit of all flesh, we need a leader. And the commentary on this is that because people are so different and people are each person is individual, a leader has to recognize the uniqueness of each people, and that's each person, and that's going to be what a leader's job is. That's what I did. That's what Joshua's going to have to do. But it's also the exact same phrase that was used in the Korach episode. So, so you might be saying to Joshua, "All right, this is not going to be easy."
I just want to pick up on one of the points you made, which is that here there is a real transformation of Moshe as a leader. What you have in the early stories of Bamidbar, rebellion, anger, inability to function, split second decision making. There are consequences to decisions that Moshe made. Here, it seems that we're now in a different place. We're kind of coasting here, and we see the transformation of his leadership, and I think the excellence that has accumulated over the years of experience, that Moshe as the seasoned leader understands things now and understands he understands his people, he understands what they need, and by inaugurating Joshua, by instigating really the transition, he's really being what a leader needs to be, which is to take care of his people. We can't talk about Pinhas without talking about the great chunk of this parsha, which is Korbanot, the end of this. But you said that this parsha is the most read parsha, beginning with Tzav ibn Yisrael Martan Korbani Lachmi Elisha Rosh Chodesh reading, but it has the daily sacrifice, Kvasim b'nei Shana Tamimim Shnayim Layom Olah Tamid, 2 sacrifices, 1 in the morning, 2 sheep, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and then a whole menu, a good allotment of animals. What's it doing here? How important is this? What does it remind us of? And what does it make you think of? Barbecue.
You're the vegan, so head up.
The vegan, that's right. But I'll tell you, it's how central sacrificial worship was in the life of our ancestors. We can't underscore that enough. A sheep in the morning, a sheep in the evening, and musaf on an extra one on Rosh Chodesh, an extra couple on Shabbat, and then a whole system, of different kinds of animals. With the greatest expression of the Sukkot. 70 animals totally.
I feel like because for good reasons, we practitioners of liberal religion were anxious about the conflict over the Temple Mount, and there was, as our listeners probably know, a plot to blow up the Golden Dome and replace it and build the Beit HaMikdash in the 1980s, which was broken up by the Shin Bet, and I'm told that I think I read this in Michael Oren's book, that after the victory in 1967, Shlomo Goren met Moshe Dayan at the top of the Temple Mount and said, "Well, okay, we're going to destroy the mosque and build the Beit HaMikdash now, right?" And Dayan said, "Okay, arrest that man. You've got to be anxious about these things." But I also think that we practitioners of liberal religion, whatever, we shouldn't lose sight of the poetic power of animal sacrifice, which we don't want to practice it, before. We don't want to do it for real. I gotcha. But I think that the offering,
we can't.
That's what we got. But the aspect of, first of all, offering something expensive, religion not being about what you get, but what you give, and also the deep identification of the symbolic identification that the animals that you're offering really stand in for the self that you are offering. You are offering your own life. And because God is merciful, this is what the Ramban says, because God is merciful, I don't actually demand you to give your life. I demand you to give a substitute for your life. But don't forget that the symbol of what you're offering is yourself. And I find that tremendously poetic. Yeah. And so I'm kind of against our conservative movement, and certainly the Reform movement, like slash all the sacrificial references out of the prayer book. I think that those references are valuable in prayer.
Indeed.
So what I would add two things. First of all, for us, what has come to replace sacrifice is prayer. And prayer is not as dramatic as an animal sacrifice. And most of us understand that, but we don't always appreciate it. Perhaps when we go to shul, we're expecting drama, which we only get in an animal sacrifice. We don't necessarily get in prayer. But what the two things have in common, and I think what we sometimes overlook with sacrifice, is this calendar of sacrifice in Pinhas is a profound way of ordering the daily life of the people. Something's going to happen every day, twice a day, and on special occasions, more of it's going to happen. And it's a way of imposing an order on the calendar and on the year. And one of the things I think we sometimes take for granted in the 21st century is that we as human beings impose order on our lives and on the world that we live in. It's not found in the world. We put it there. And we need that in order for us to survive as individuals and as societies. Order is the key to continuity.
I think that's a profound idea, and it's a good place to pause at the end of this parsha, really to understand that we are in religious life, in the worship life, in sacrificial life of antiquity, really trying to order the chaotic world, and nothing really defines that more than the moment that we're living in, which is completely chaotic on some levels, and which we are all trying for some modicum of order, some stability, and some way of imposing a kind of even a ritual order on this. And that's why, I think the three of us coming together certainly represents that on some level, and Shabbat represents that. It's enormous. I think that the opportunity to anchor and to order our lives through the weekly reading and the weekly study of Torah is profound. It's profound implications for our lives, and it's a great bracha always to be together, the three of us. Let's say Shabbat Shalom. We want to say Shabbat Shalom to all of our loyal listeners and viewers. We love getting your mail. We love getting your reactions. Send it to us and like us. We want to be loved. We want to be liked.
We want to thank our West Coast listeners, Paula Rose. Thank you.
Paula Rose.
Thank you
for our East Coast listener, Arnie Steinberg.
Arnie Steinberg,
and
yes.
A couple of others who will remain nameless. Marlene Herman from
I don't know their names.
Yeah. All right. Shabbat Shalom. Blessings.
Shabbat Shalom.
Watch.